Chokan Valikhanov, Secrets of Kashgar. My address, Kokchetov settlement, via Petropavlsk in western Siberia. From Valikhanov's letter to Dostoevsky. Chokan would often come here, to his grandmother Aiganym's estate, and it's no wonder. This is where he spent his entire childhood. According to one of the legends, Aiganym made young Chokan drag stones up a hill and write her name in order for him to develop a love for his native land and not forget the place he called home. And he did not forget, but there was one place in his life to which he was drawn, the place he was more than once in mortal danger, a place that became his triumph. The place he has written so much about, and yet it seems still more remains unwritten. This place was Kashgar. Chokan's final dream. The Kashgar climate is warm, even hot. It will save me, and I will heal. And in the same letter to Fedor Mikhailovich, Chokan wrote that he intended to become a consul in Kashgar. Why? Was it just the warm climate that drew him there? What secrets have remained hidden behind the ancient walls? What kind of life did the merchant Alimbai have in Kashgar? In the guise of a spy, constantly persecuted and under suspicion. How can one not marry a hat? And he chose the beauty Mariam. And how did they wish to take his triumph away? The dream comes true, and then what an ending. An operative's dream and intrigue at the palace. Street brawls, a distant lover and a network of spies. Chokan Valikhanov, Secrets of Kashgar. Chapter 1. A Merchant from Kokand. I managed to infiltrate Kashgar, which, since the famous Marco Polo and Bento de Gois, had been visited by only 2 Europeans, a German, an officer of the East India Company, last name unknown, after whom a curious road here was taken by a scientist, Adolf Schlagentweit. The former was beaten with bamboo sticks so hard that for 2 days he could not mount a horse. The latter had his head cut off. Chokan Valikhanov. How many secrets that still remain uncovered in Chokan Valikhanov's journey is not known. He wrote a detailed diary on Kashgar, but he did not write about himself in such detail. For example, the phrase, "The miraculous water of Kashgar evokes love." What does this concern? However, love and miraculous water will be discussed later. On October 1st, 1858, the gates opened and Valikhanov, now known as the Kokand merchant Alimbai, entered Kashgar. The city had just recovered from the uprising. For almost a year, the rebellious Khoja kept the inhabitants in fear. The Chinese troops then arrived and put things in order in a no less brutal way. At the entrance to the city, they passed through the palisade. Here, there stood poles with cages mounted at their tops. Within the cages, there were severed heads. These belonged to the rebels that took part in the recently suppressed insurgency. At that time, it was one of the most closed cities in the world. However, it was closed only to Europeans, in particular the Russians and the British. For everyone else, it was a lively crossroads of trade.
This one and that one are 2 different old cities. This is a smaller one, which will be the preserved for tourism. The government said this will be the preserved for tourism. Nearly 3,500 people, mainly the Uyghur people, live in this old town nowadays.
At times, it seems that life here has been frozen exactly as it was 150 years ago, with the same narrow streets as described by Chokan, and houses with flat roofs built like flaked pastry.
These buildings like pie. Why?
Some people, they build their houses like 7-floor, 6-floor houses. You know, they have houses under basement for using summertime because it's really hot in summertime in this area.
Valikhanov apparently lived in a similar house with his wife. and also in a caravanserai. The seating for foreigners wasn't far from Central Square. Under a light canopy, the street connected the two bazaars. In the shop, Chokan sold fabrics and other goods. Business was going well. He walked around the bazaar and bought whatever he liked. He bought samples of metals and ceramics, as well as countless items of folk crafts and huge collections of manuscripts. He was such a genuinely universal scientist. Relations with the Chokan protege developed quite well, and when another ruler was appointed after the former was arrested, the two even became friends. Chokan learned from him the details of the coups at the palace and other important information. The governor willingly attended the feasts that Chokan threw for him, exchanged gifts, and allowed Valikhanov to go out at night. After 9 p.m, Kashgarians were obliged to stay at home. One cannot imagine how some of the incidents would have turned out had it not been for the help of the governor. In our lodgings, a man from Chokan argued with a noble chieftain. He lifted a whip to strike, only to be beaten himself. The chieftain's helpers rushed to his aid. We repelled the attack and locked the gate. The crowd did not stop the siege and threw stones over the wall. At the insistence of the governor, the perpetrators of the fight were punished with rods. Chokan Valikhanov. Nevertheless, foreigners were under strict supervision, and Chokan needed to be more careful. He was under scrutiny from both the Chinese authorities and the suspicious officials of Chokan. I would say that Chokan was such a hero, knowing what a difficult journey awaited him and not knowing whether he would survive, but nevertheless agreeing to it. To keep your head, one had to be inconspicuous. The custom in Kashgar was that every foreigner had to get married. How did Chokan choose his wife? Are there any descendants of Valikhanov in Kashgar? And what do the hats have to do with it? Chapter 2. Marriage through a hat. For several centuries, Kashgar has been a city of hat makers. It is famous for them. You can buy a skull cap like this one. It is just taking its shape. Or a warm hat like this one. There are hats made from rabbit skin, from lamb skin, and so on. This one is wolf skin. Speaking not only of hats, but of other things. Wherever you go, there can be no delights without dancers, who sing surprisingly tenderly the poem of Layla and Majnun, so beloved in Kashgar. If you had a heart of stone, it would be unable to resist such seductive singing and be turned into shish kebab. The only thing left for you would be to marry. Chokan Valikhanov. According to local custom, a Muslim foreigner who came to Kashgar ought to get married. The duties of the temporary husband were to feed and clothe his spouse. They were called Chokan. When it was time to leave, he would not take his wife with him. Instead, he got divorced and was free again. And this is the story of how they chose him a bride. A story told by himself, in the inimitable Valikhanov style. Immediately after a scrupulous description of the annual turnover of the Kashgar trade, he drew a sketch worthy of the pen of Mark Twain, who was all about the hats. There are 3 beds in the room, and each has a row of hats. The emissary directs his gaze to the bed, on which a whole regiment of hats now lies, and joyfully exclaims, "Your star is at its highest point. I have found for you far more than a maiden. 20 hats. Surprise! 20 hats? What is this all about? Didn't they come to sell them?" Chokan Valikhanov. A bride would be chosen by the number of skullcaps that hung on the fences of these houses. Subtle humor, and an unquestionable literary gift. One can imagine the supposed merchant Alambay completely baffled by such a colourful custom, brought in to, quote, marry 20 hats. What is this business with the hats? Meanwhile, some say that this is the surest sign of beauty. She had been chosen 20 times and sewed a hat for each husband. It seems appalling. What beauty could endure 20 husbands? He says that if you don't like one bride, you are free to take a new one. And what will happen to my money, you say? With the money, he says? Mashallah, are you stupid? The money has been paid and therefore is no longer yours. Chokan Valikhanov. This description now follows. The doors open and a crowd of girls come in. One of them is plumper and therefore more beautiful, according to local custom. The veil is lifted, and here is another quote. Before you there is a real mistress of the ages, white and rosy, and the devil only knows what else. If you are a fan of Oriental bliss, then, mashallah, you don't need pillows. You can sink luxuriously in a soft embrace. Damn. If you have yet to rise to such a lofty concept of beauty and prefer more meager subjects, then one thing remains. Put your trust in Allah and run. Certainly run, and don't get carried away with the number of hats. Chokan Valikhanov. Whether it was possible to escape or not, and whom Chokan chose, no lines are written, and more generally, did things happen this way? Chokan Valikhanov was allowed to choose, and he chose the beautiful Maryam. This is Chokan's wife in Kashgar, named Shalkin. But these are all speculations. Chokan did not write the name of his temporary wife, or any other details of his family life. Chokan Valikhanov's personal life has always been a mystery. He did not like to elaborate on this matter. What role the Kashgar wife played in his life and what it meant to him remains unknown, and that is why there is so much conjecture. They were both young and beautiful. They fell in love with each other. It is even said they had a child, a son. According to another version of events, there is a village in China associated with the name of Chokan Valikhanov, and that his descendants live there. But this story has not been investigated. Supposedly, this is one of the reasons why Chokan really wanted to return to Kashgar. What's known for certain is that his wife helped Valikhanov in his difficult mission. Why did the temporary wife assist Chokan? Who else helped him? And how could such a feat be accomplished? Chapter 3. At Home Amongst Strangers. Kashgar is a populous city, inhabited mainly by Muslims. The Chinese occupy a separate citadel. The residents do not differ from any large crowd of people in terms of morals. They openly drink wine and do not hide women, writes Chokan. The police are oblivious to the smoking of hashish and the drinking of wine. They do make sure, though, that there is no violence and arrest only drunk people in the streets. Foreigners living in Kashgar enjoy the freedom of local customs and indulge in unbridled debauchery. From the report of Chokan Valikhanov, second half of the 19th century. In all countries prone to revolution, there is a special class of people who love to rebel, without conviction, so to speak, through their love for art. In Kashgar, a similar class consists of dervishes, hashish smokers, gamblers, and proletarians. They are the first to raise arms during uprisings and slaughter all the chieftains and the Chinese. And when the Khoja fled, they would rob the houses of his dignitaries and help the Chinese. Chokan Valikhanov. My acquaintance with merchants from various countries led me down many paths, ethnographic, statistical, trade, and others based on Valikhanov's diary. Just sitting in the marketplace can, of course, help you gather a lot of information, but each operative should have their own agents, be it ideological allies, hired hands, or, so to speak, intimate agents. All of these means are fair in intelligence. According to some researchers, Chokan created a fully fledged intelligence network in Kashgar. These may well have been agents in Kashgar, these four and these four. They were identified, and an intelligence-based connection was made with them. But the main agent, the researchers say, was his temporary wife, perhaps without even knowing it. Chokan Valikhanov's temporary wife could collect information for him from the female half of Kashgar, from the wives of policemen, from the wives of major traders, from the wives of employees of the Kashgar administration. He was here for 5 months, travelled around the neighbourhood, visited other cities of Altishar, and carefully wrote everything down, despite the fact that it was extremely dangerous. I kept a constant diary on the way to and in Kashgar. The information collected during the trip consists of my personal observations, reports from those I trusted, and testimony verified by others, from written sources received from merchants, officials, and from documents and books. Chokan Valikhanov. While performing an intelligence mission, he was engaged in science, true science. Ethnography, geography, topography, finance, customs, linguistics. He did an incredible amount of work, and yet he didn't have the time to do it all. Apparently, somehow, he encrypted the records, trying not to attract attention, and carefully hid them. And then, once he was in a safer place, he restored the events in his memory, which was remarkable. In the guise of a spy, constantly suspected and persecuted by the sophisticated Chinese secret police, surrounded by agents on every side, risking every second, a single foot wrong could end his life. He knew what he was doing, but the main thing was his diaries, which were priceless. At any moment, newcomers might identify him, and it became more and more difficult for him to play his role. Rumors arose several times that there was a disguised Russian agent in the city. They say that his wife accompanied him to the gate. In March 1859, the caravan hastily left the city. As soon as we left, a formidable letter was received from Kokand. The one you reported as being a merchant is no such thing. Capture and kill him immediately. The governor set out in pursuit, but returned with no luck. The Kokand Khan executed him as punishment for letting the agent into Kashgar. From the stories of Valikhanov's companions. The 5 months in Kashgar determined the rest of his entire life. A year later, Valikhanov was honored in St. Petersburg as a hero. This was his peak, his moment of triumph. He was received by the sovereign Alexander II himself. The doors of all the socialite places are open for the Kashgar hero. He has many influential friends. A bright future is predicted for him, and he is full of hope. But all of this was soon to collapse. Why was he going to become a consul in Kashgar? Where are Valikhanov's secret records kept? And how did the moment of triumph become the basis for persecution? Epilogue: The Operative's Dream. A man in my condition cannot remain forever in St. Petersburg. Therefore, I want to take the position of consul in Kashgar or otherwise retire and serve back at home in elections. In Kashgar, I would receive good support. The climate there is good. My health would improve. From Valikhanov's letter to Dostoevsky. "I want to take the position of a consul in Kashgar," a strange phrase. The letter to Dostoevsky was written in January 1862 in Syrymbet, most likely at a table like this. This is a reconstruction. Personal items that have survived from Chokan Valikhanov are a round wooden box, his scissors, a snuff box, an ashtray shaped like two leaves, and a travel chest. The letter is written as if he was really getting ready for the trip. But at that time, there were no foreign missions, and indeed, there were still no foreigners in this region. The Russian consulate was only opened 2 decades later. That's why I think that he was being prepared for a new mission in Kashgar. Let's suppose that that was the case. It is clear that he could not write about this, even to a close friend. But then, what prevented him from doing so? In the same year, another uprising took place in a neighboring province to Kashgar, and the city itself was restless. Any project to open an official consulate or a new intelligence operation had to be postponed, if, of course, such plans existed. Chokan's work cannot be read at face value. You have to read between the lines. Only when you do so will you understand everything. And in the same year, a huge agenda against Valikhanov begins. It is based on envy of his success. It was all because the emperor appreciated so highly the achievements of the Kazakh Sultan. And yet again, gossip, denunciations, intrigues. An absolutely incredible rumor began to spread. What they wrote about me is just incredibly ridiculous. You see, when I was sent to Kashgar, I didn't actually live there, but in the mountains near Verny. And when I arrived in Omsk, I wrote various nonsense. From Valikhanov's letter to Gutkovsky. Omsk was the center of the intrigue. Gasford, the Governor-General of Western Siberia, and one of the organizers of the Kashgar expedition, resigned and was replaced by Alexander Dugamel. Alexander sent a new expedition in order to confirm the Kashgar routes indicated by Valikhanov. The detachment only reached Narin and then returned to Omsk. The moment when he seems to have achieved something and the dream had come true, here you have such an ending. Chokan never went to Kashgar, and in his subsequent letters that were preserved, there was no word about the consulate. And in general, nothing of what he wrote to Dostoevsky about worked out. He did not retire, nor did he serve for the elections in the Horde. Our Aiganym protected area begins from the foothills, then the Ili River flows and Aiganym. Everything is close by. Here he spent the last year of his life. Nobody knows why. Allegedly, he was traveling to St. Petersburg through Semipalatinsk, fell ill on the way, and stopped in the village of a relative, Sultan Tezek. And then there was further unrest in Kashgar. Another rebel came to power. Valikhanov was the first to learn about all the events. He had a wide network of agents who he sent across the border. The agents clarified the situation there and returned. Everything they said to Chokan was put into an envelope and sent elsewhere. He was an operative in Aiganym. Judging by the letters, he really did carry out secret assignments and was working on his notes. I am enclosing a note about Altishar. A prolonged illness has not allowed me to fully process this, but it contains facts that are still unknown. Chokan Valikhanov. But he did not have time to completely finalize the Kashgar diaries. After his death, many letters and other documents simply disappeared. How and who had a hand in this is still unclear. Another question is whether Chokan took all the records out of Kashgar. It is possible that he hid some just as he had hidden his diary before entering the closed city. He somehow observed the rules of conspiracy. He had some hiding places and caches. And perhaps some of them are still kept in Kashgar, somewhere in a secret place.